What's up, guys? Hope you guys are all doing well. So this one is pretty fun. Basically, we get involved in a lot of pots with hands that are definitely a bit skeptical, a bit marginal, but I'm sure you guys will love this one. A lot of post-flop play, which is always, pretty fun. So hope you guys enjoy this one. If you haven't already, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you guys down at the field at Seminole Casino Coconut Creek. Let's go. In for $1,000 at the 2-5 game, but after playing for around 30 minutes, we notice that our table is a bit passive and we see a much better table across the room. This can happen from time to time, but game selection is really important to improve your win rate in the long run, so if you see a better table, don't be hesitant to switch. Prior to this hand, we were very card dead and we won a few smaller pots, so we're actually starting off this hand with around 1250 in our stack. When there's one limp to me and we look down at King 9 of diamonds, I'm definitely going to be raising this one up. I make it 30. We see a cold call from the player on the button, and then the initial raiser gets out of the way. So we're going heads up to a flop. The flop comes down 8-10 queen with 1 diamond, so all around a pretty good flop. We're both pretty deep, so a board like this, if we can get there, hopefully we can commit stacks and potentially win a really big one. I continue for $20, and now he puts in a raise. It's definitely on the smaller side. He only makes it $55 with a really strong draw and a bunch of backdoor possibilities, and we also have an overcard. So for this sizing and stack depth, I'm just going to make the call and we're off to see a turn. Well, it's like you almost wrote it out of a book because the turn is an offsuit jack. This is an amazing card for a few reasons. Now, if this player has a 9, we actually beat that with King 9. I don't think he ever has Ace King, and if he just has a 9, we are most likely going to be getting a lot of money in here. I check it over to him, but unfortunately, he decides to now check it back. A bit unfortunate, but now we're off to see a river, which is an offsuit 2. I could be sneaky and try to check raise, but once he showed weakness on the turn, I think I just have to take the betting lead and hopefully get called by maybe a 2 pair or like a hand as weak as top pair. So I throw out $100 and he pretty quickly snap calls. Obviously we're good, we show, and yeah, he mucks. So I'm wondering if I could have gotten more value there on the river, but regardless, happy to take it down. A lot of time has passed until we look down at 2 tens after putting on the button straddle. The hijack opens up the action to $35 and it folds back around to me. I think tens are just a little bit too strong to flat here, considering you raise from a later position. I think I'm more inclined to put in a raise. I think we have the best hand here a lot of the time. So I make it $125. When action's back on him, he thinks that 125 is still a bit too shallow. He decides to put in another raise. He now makes it $310. Only 31 big blinds when action's back on me. I think this is a pretty easy call being in position, so we're off to see a flop. The flop is definitely not ideal. The flop comes King 4-5 with 2 diamonds and 1 heart. He decides to put in a c-bet of $175. I expect him to do this with a lot of his range, and I expect him to shut down on a lot of turns. So I decide to make the call in peel 1, and we're off to see a turn. The turn brings no help, and it doesn't really change much of anything. It is a 7 of hearts. This time, he now bets $575, leaving himself with around 400 or so behind. At this point, I think our decision is pretty easy. I actually go into the tank just trying to figure out what hands he could be bluffing here with on 2 streets, and I really can't think of much besides maybe like some suited wheel diamond hands, but at the end of the day, I think we can just find a way better spot. So I make the fold and we're off to see another one. In this next hand, we're playing 5-handed, so I decide to open up Queen 9 of spades in early position, and we do see 2 calls from the cutoff, and then also the player in the small blind. So we're off to see a flop. The flop is King 4-6 rainbow, but there is 1 spade on board. On a board like this that's very dry, I can go one of 2 ways. Obviously, I can put in a bet and barrel on a lot of good turn cards, but the player that is in the cutoff, he's been overcalling my c-bets way too often. I literally don't think he's folded to a single one. So that being said, I decide to pump the brakes and check it. The cutoff now bets $30, and the small blind decides to make the call. On a board like this, I think I'm still way more likely to have a lot of the really strong hands, such as aces, kings, ace, king, etc. So now, I decide to put in a check raise with absolutely nothing. I decide to raise it up to $150, and one by one, both of the players decide to release their cards. Well, that was pretty cool. Happy to take it down. Alright guys, this next one is a bit weird. I have 5-8 offsuit and I am on the button. Hint, I do have the straddle on. That is why I'm actually playing this hand in the first place. But the preflop action is a bit funny. So both the blinds decide to just call the $10, which indicates a very weak hand. I've noticed that a lot of the 2-5 players, if they're in the blinds and there's a straddle, they just hate folding their blinds. So once again, don't think they have a strong hand here at all. When action's back on me, I definitely want to be playing pots in position against these two guys. So I raise it up to $60 as a bluff, hoping to take it down now. But if we do get called, I think we can play this hand in position pretty well. Sure enough, both of them call the 60. So already not that ideal, but hey, there's still 5 cards that are yet to come. The flop is deuce, deuce, 6 rainbow. So literally the driest board you could possibly imagine. So when action checks to me, I think I definitely want to be still putting in a bet here with 8 high. So I throw out a third of the pot. I throw out $60 once again. And to my surprise, the player in the small blind doesn't wait for too long and raises it up to $200. The player in the big blind decides to get out of the way. And when action's on me, I think for a second, and obviously you guys are like, okay, this is just a fold. You literally have nothing. And you are definitely right. I don't have anything. But this is where live dynamics come into play. This player has been check calling a lot of my C-bets all night, and he knows that I've been barreling on a lot of streets. So from his perspective, I just don't think he's ever doing this with a strong hand. Like, I literally think if this player had a 2, I think he would be way more likely to flat and trap opposed to racing on the flop. And if he had a 6, he just simply would not be doing this. So I really think this is just a stone cold bluff. That being said, when action's back on me, I decide to call the 200, planning on just putting him in a miserable spot if he decides to check the turn. So we're off to see a turn with absolutely nothing and bad intentions, which now comes in 8. So we somehow back ourselves into top pair, but once again, I still don't want to deviate away from my play that I had previously. I still want to put him in a pretty miserable spot, and who knows, maybe we can like level him into a call with like pocket 3s or whatever. Anyways, when he checks it over to me, I look over at his stack and he's around $500 behind. So I just decided to put him all in. In hindsight, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I could have gone like half pot and then jammed river for value. But I don't know. I just felt like this guy just didn't have a single thing. And I already had my mind made up on the flop of what I was going to do. But nonetheless, after I jam all in, he decides to snap fold. So our read on the situation was correct, and we scoop in a pretty good pot. In this next one, we look down at ace-king offsuit under the gun. Pretty easy open, and we see 2 calls from the player in middle position and then the player in the small blind. So we're going 3 ways to a flop where the flop comes out king 10-8 with 2 hearts. All around a really good board. We have top pair, top kicker, and we can get value from an array of different draws. When action starts off with me, this is a board that I will be c-betting fairly large on, because once again, we can get value from all sorts of draws and worst king X. It checks to me, and I put in a c-bet of $40. I think I could actually go closer to like pot here, but the middle position player decides to min click me to $80. The small blind folds, and this is the same player that's just been doing unorthodox stuff all night. And I look over at his stack, and he is around $600 behind. Obviously not going anywhere, but now it's a question of whether I want to raise or just flat call. Being out of position, I definitely more inclined to raise because I would hate to just call this, him check back the turn, and then him see a cheap river. So with all sorts of draws out there, I decided to put in another raise to $275. He started off the hand with around $650, and I'm planning on just jamming any turn that looks clean. He tanks for around a minute and a half, and unfortunately lets the cards go. So once again, a weird play by him, but we happily take down the pot. In this next hand, we see a button straddle, and we are in the big blind with ace-10 offsuit. The small blind calls at $10. I bump it up to $60, and it folds back around to the small blind player who makes the call. So we're going heads up to a flop in position. The flop comes down 6 deuce 4 rainbow. He checks over to me. I put in a small $35 c-bet, and he decides to make the call. We're off to see a turn, which is another 6. So a bit of an interesting card. I don't think this is going to connect with either of us too often. When he checks over to me, I decide to put in another bet of $125. Honestly, I don't think I like this bet all that often. I think this player, any pairs are going to continue, and basically we're just folding out overs, which we already beat with ace high. So when I bet $125, he does decide to make the call. So we're off to see a river, which is a 4 of clubs. So a double paired board, and we do have an ace kicker. So when he checks over to me now, I think that there's not that much point in betting. I think my ace high showdown with 2 pair can be good sometimes. So I check it back, and unfortunately for us, he shows king 4 of hearts. So definitely one of those hands that we wanted to play post flop with, but unfortunately for us, he had a really strong one this time. In this next one, I have the button straddle on, and a new player just sat down in middle position. He opens up the action to $30, folds back around to me, and with jack 4 offsuit, obviously a fold here is ideal, but I get sticky and try to see if I can navigate post flop against this specific player. The flop comes out queen deuce 9 with 2 hearts. We do have the jack of hearts. He checks over to me, and this time I bet $25, and he decides to make the call. When he checks the flop, I think we can eliminate all queens out of his range. He most likely has a 9 here. The turn is a 5 of diamonds, so when he checks it this time, I do prefer a bet here, but I decide to check it back and see a river that is potentially good to bluff on. So the river comes, and now it is a jack. So I'm sitting here with what I know is probably the best hand, and he checks it over once again. The front door flush did work out, so I think he is very likely to call light, especially with the line that I've taken so far. So I think a larger bet is in order to try to level once again a 9 into a call. So I throw out a 3/4 pot bet. I bet $75, and he snap calls. I go ahead and table my hand still pretty confidently, and sure enough, he goes ahead and mucks. So I'm happy that we spiked the jack there on the river, because who knows, we might have gotten ourselves into some trouble. In this next hand, we have ace deuce offsuit, and we are on the button. I have the straddle on once again. A player to my left, who looks like a competent player, he opens up the action to $35 in the small blind. We see a call from the player in late position, and I decide to make the call, and we're off to see a flop. The flop comes out 6-4-10 rainbow, and the early position player does not stop betting. The small blind player throws out $40. Action folds to me, and this is a spot where I think out of everyone in the hand, I'm the most likely one to have all the sets, being in late position. So I decide to put in a raise as a bluff, planning on applying a lot of pressure on future streets, so I throw out a raise of $125. He thinks for a little bit, and he eventually does decide to make the call. So we're off to see a turn, which is pretty good, I think, in my opinion. It is another 10. So when he checks over to me, I don't want to stop betting, and I think I can apply a lot of pressure on this card. So I throw out $225, and he doesn't think for too long and quickly releases his hand. All right, now we can finally play a good hand and stop playing post-flop with all these marginal hands. We look down at 2 kings in the small blind. There's 1 limp in middle position, and then the player in the cutoff raises to $25. Obviously, we're going to be putting in a raise ourselves, so I make it $90. It folds back around to the player in the hijack who limped, and now he calls the $90. What the heck is going on? But we absolutely love it. Now, this couldn't get any better. The player now in the cutoff jams all in. Although not a big jam, he only had $225, but I think we can either go one of 2 ways here. Obviously, isolating is fine, but the other guy only has around $400 to $500 in a stack himself. So I want to, I think, flat call this to entice him into the pot and then play post flop against this specific player. Because if I jam, he's just going to fold out all of his marginal hands that we're absolutely crushing. So I just flat call, and sure enough, the player in the hijack makes the call as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop, 1 player all in, and now we're playing for a side pot. The flop is about as good as I could have asked for. The flop is 7-3 deuce rainbow. So all over pairs are going to have a hard time folding on this board. When action starts off with me, I decide to put in a C bet of $100, and he decides to make the call. Praying to see no ace on the turn, and luckily for us, the turn is a 9 of diamonds, so a really clean card. When action starts with me, I look over at his stack, and he has around $225 behind. So at this point, I think the only bet size that makes sense is all in. So that's what I do. I put him all in, and he tanks forever. Obviously, at this point, hoping for a call. And after tanking for around 3 minutes, he does eventually flick in a call. I go ahead and immediately table my hand, just obviously knowing that I'm good. So now, no more action, and we're off to see a river. The river comes, and it is a 5 of clubs. Both players look disappointed, and obviously that means that the chips are going to be pushed our way. So happy I made the decision to flat pre-flop, because the player in the hijack ended up showing his hand and he had 5-6 of hearts. So we had a double gutter, and obviously our pair is going to beat a busted draw. This next one is a bit of a fun one. There's a button straddle in the small blind, which is my friend who I've played with countless times. He opens up the action to $35. It folds to me, and this is a spot where a fold is obviously fine. But I see the button getting ready to fold prematurely, which means that we can play this hand in position with $10 of extra dead money in the middle. A suited 3-gapper, oh well, I'm going to play it. And as expected, the button does get out of the way. So we're off to see a flop in position. So the flop comes down at Jack 3-4 with the Jack and the 4 of hearts. So all around, a pretty good board. I don't expect him to have too many jacks here, and we can't be scared of monsters under the bed. So he decides to throw in a C bet, and I pretty quickly make the call. The turn now is a deuce of clubs, and he is not done betting. This time he throws out $100. So I know what you guys are thinking. Harrison, you're getting yourself into a big trap, and sure, against 90% of the population, that is true. But against my friend, I know he just has so many double barrels here, and as crazy as it sounds, I'm pretty confident I still have the best hand. If he has a hand such as 2 overs or a flush draw or both, I don't expect him to be folding to a smaller raise, and that is exactly what I'm going to plan on doing, and obviously planning on checking back almost every river besides a 7 or a 4. So that is exactly what I do. I raise it up to $250 on the smaller side, once again trying to keep all overcards and flush draws in the mix, and if he doesn't raise here, I would say that there's a decent chance that we are good. I recently read something that basically said if you're not doing enough thin value bets and value owning yourself, then you just simply aren't going for value often enough. So if we value own ourselves in this hand, oh well, I'll just deal with it later on. And yeah, he does decide to make the call. So we're off to see a river, and it is a 10 of spades, so a pretty decent break if you ask me. He checks it over to me, and now obviously we can't get value from anything worse. I check it back, and he says ace high. So boom, our read on the situation was pretty spot on, and with a absolute garbage hand, we ended up making the absolute maximum, I would have to assume. In this last hand of the night, we're in the low jack with king jack offsuit. There's a button straddle, and we see 3 calls to me. This is a hand that I think I could fold or raise. I just decided to raise just because I feel like I've been running well, and why not? I bump it up to $100, and it folds back around to the small blind, and he does decide to make the call. So pretty good outcome so far. We're playing a hand in position against a player that has a pretty deep stack. The flop is 3-4-5 with 2 diamonds and 1 club. I do have the king of diamonds, so that's a pretty good card to have in the spot. If any diamond peels on the turn, I can continue barreling, but if he just has 2 overs, I expect him to fold a decent amount of the time. So I put in a small c-bet of $40, and he does decide to make the call. So we're off to see a turn, and once again, just can't run bad today. It is a king of hearts, so now we back ourselves into top pair. He checks over to me, and obviously instead of bluffing now, we can pretty comfortably go for some value. The sizing that I like to choose is $130, and unfortunately for us, he doesn't think for too long and does let it go. That was the last hand of the night. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the hands. Now it's time to get out of here and hit the cage. So in this one, we were in for around $2,000, and we were out for $36.64. So around like 1.6K profit. So definitely good. Once again, it would mean the world if you liked and subscribed the video if you enjoyed it. And once again, I'll see you guys in the next one.